Although some details from the secret eyes-only document leaked in 1974, the full 693-page CIA memo, subject name Family Jewels, was not released to the public until 2007. Supposedly revealing covert and often illegal spy and paramilitary operations, the Family Jewels, however, contained one glaring redaction. Under Attachment A, the Family Jewel number 1 is completely sanitized. The redaction can't help but beg the question, what dark secret could Family Jewel number 1 be hiding that still needs to be protected decades? In the spring of 1973, James R. Schlesinger was preparing to leave his position as the director of the CIA to become the Secretary of Defense for a Nixon administration under mounting pressure. His exit from the agency came with a remarkable request. Amidst the American public's rising awareness of the Watergate scandal and the agency's role therein, Schlesinger wanted to know what else the CIA had done to stray outside the rules during his brief tenure there, or under any previous administration for that matter. He released a memo to CIA senior officials asking for reports, quote, on any activities now going on, or that have gone on in the past, which might be construed to be outside the legislative charter of the agency. It invited information from all current and former CIA employees, an effort to collect accurate testimony from across the various subdivisions of the agency. The CIA's deputy director, William Colby, went to work compiling the various letters and memos that began to pour into a single notebook, a dossier of classified intelligence that would grow to almost 700 pages. The file contained detailed information on assassination attempts, mind control experiments, secret prison sites, and the surveillance of private American citizens by CIA agents. The contents of the file became known as the CIA's Family Jewels, a compendium of covert and questionable activity by the agency that stretched back to its infancy. Colby officially became Schlesinger's replacement as director of the CIA on September 4, 1974. As news broke of illegal wiretapping by President Nixon and Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, it was Colby who decided to lock the Family Jewels folder in a safe in his office to protect the agency from prying eyes. Colby believed in transparency, but at the same time, the documents contained secrets both he and Schlesinger had been completely ignorant of, secrets which had the potential to irreparably damage the CIA's credibility and potentially shutter its doors for good. Yet certain pieces of information from Family Jewels were still exposed via congressional testimony and journalistic rigor. One notable instance of the latter was a December 22, 1974 New York Times front page story by legendary reporter Seymour Hersh, detailing, quote, a massive, illegal domestic intelligence operation during the Nixon administration against the anti-war movement and other dissident groups in the United States. Colby himself gave a complicit interview to Hersh confirming much of the story's contents. Other classified intel from the Family Jewels leaked out as rumors and half-truths. For example, stories about the CIA's experimentations with LSD or their elaborately schemed assassinations abroad. In the wake of the Hersh expose, Colby sent a summary of the contents of the Family Jewels to Kissinger, who continued on as Secretary of State under President Ford. Kissinger further boiled Colby's summary down to a 5-page memo and presented it to President Ford. In it, he warns that many of the CIA's actions during the 1960s were obviously illegal, and that many raised, quote, profound moral questions. He privately called it the Horrors Book. The full contents of the Family Jewels did not see the light of day until their declassification in June 2007, 34 years after they were first assembled by Colby. A 6-page summary of the released material was made public at the National Security Archive, with the following introduction attached. Quote, the Central Intelligence Agency violated its charter for 25 years until revelations of illegal wiretapping, domestic surveillance, assassination plots, and human experimentation led to official investigations and reforms in the 1970s. While much of the broad strokes of the material contained in the reports had already emerged over the decades, the official release still pulled back the curtain on many of the specifics of these violations. One of the first things one notices in looking over the full contents of the Family Jewels file is that a significant portion of its 693 pages is made up of duplicate accounts, news clippings, and blank pages, leaving an accurate page count of useful material at more like 500 pages. The first document in the folder is a 1973 introductory memo from Colby detailing the jewels and the purpose of compiling them. In it, he lists 18 specific examples of the agency's malpractice that the folder addresses. The list confirms the issue of domestic surveillance already raised by Hirsch and Congress, phone tapping and spying on anti-war and civil rights groups, opening mail to and from both the Soviet Union and China, break-ins at the homes of defectors and former CIA employees. The first item on Colby's list relates to the confinement of a KGB defector named Yuri Nosenko. Nosenko contacted the CIA in 1962 from Geneva and offered information on the Russian spy agency. He did some work as a mole for the CIA, but was eventually detained in 1964 under suspicion that he was still working for the KGB as a double agent. He was held under house arrest at a CIA safe house in Maryland for 3 years and subject to multiple forms of enhanced interrogation. Colby admits in his introduction that Nosenko's detention, quote, might be regarded as a violation of the kidnapping laws. Another long-dormant rumor confirmed by the family Jewels was the existence and activity of Project MKUltra. The Jewels report confirms it was sanctioned in 1953, reduced in scope in 1964, and fully shut down by 1973, the year the family Jewels report was first put together. Colby referred to MKUltra's activities as, quote, behavior modification experiments on unwitting U.S. citizens. For all of the explosive material related to domestic surveillance and experiments, the family Jewels dossier ended up containing less information about foreign activity than many were expecting. However, Colby's introduction does list, quote, assassination plots against Castro, Lumumba, and Trujillo as a line item, and reports within do confirm one of the most legendary CIA plots in history, the assassination attempts on Cuban President Fidel Castro in collaboration with the Italian Mafia. In September 1960, the CIA reached out to higher-ups in both the Chicago outfit and Miami syndicate branches of the Mafia about the possibility of arranging a hit on Castro. On September 14, 1960, CIA liaison Robert Mayhew, posing as a businessman with anti-Castro interests in Cuba, met with Chicago mobster Johnny Rosselli in a New York City hotel room. The Jewels report confirms that Mayhew offered Rosselli $150,000 to, quote, remove Castro from office, but do not confirm if any agreement was made. It appears discussions went on, and poisoned food was determined as a delivery method for the hit, as allegedly multiple attempts were made by Mafia point men in Cuba, but were eventually disrupted by the Bay of Pigs invasion. Perhaps the most intriguing new piece of information to emerge from the official release of the family Jewels is not a piece of information at all, but hints at the existence of a new CIA secret still unknown to the general public. There is one line item in the summary that has been fully blacked out and redacted. The full 2.5-page report that it relates to is also fully redacted, leading many to label this secret report as the missing jewel. Much of the other redacted material contained in the family Jewels was removed because it relates to tradecraft that's still applicable today. For instance, the methods the CIA uses to manufacture cover identities and forge documents. But the full missing jewel report likely points to a larger and perhaps more sinister operation that the agency simply could not risk exposing to the public, even after decades. Experts like Thomas Blanton, director of the National Security Archive, are still in the dark about what the missing jewel report may refer to. Quote, we just don't know, Blanton says, though considering its prominent placement on the list and the secrecy surrounding it, he admits, quote, it's probably a pretty good one. The mass exposure of the American public to the CIA's dubious activities of the 1950s and 60s dealt a huge blow to the agency's ability to act omnipotently in the 1970s and going forward. In the spring of 1975, the Ford White House faced congressional hearings over the actions of the CIA. Colby, still hoping to be able to transform the agency through transparency, participated actively in the investigations. Schlesinger, still Secretary of Defense at the time, told President Ford that it was imperative to scale back the agency's power and presence abroad, and lamented that Colby was being, quote, too damned cooperative with Congress. It was thus that, perhaps fearing what else a new era of transparency might uncover, Secretary of State Henry Kissinger urged Ford to replace Schlesinger and Colby in what came to be known as the Halloween Massacre. A cabinet shakeup saw George H.W. Bush named as director of the CIA, Donald Rumsfeld elevated to Secretary of Defense, and Dick Cheney moved to Chief of Staff. It's little wonder that in the New York Times, security researcher Amy Zagert would write about the family Jewels, quote, given all the illegal activities actually listed in this document, the hidden sections are all the more disturbing. It seems that the CIA remains intent on keeping us in the dark.